Welcome back to another episode of Deac2Deac. In this episode, I had the opportunity to sit down with Ben Sutton. Now, a lot of you know Ben's name from the various facilities around campus. Others know his name from the continued success that he has in business. But if you're a true Wake Forest fan, you know the name Ben Sutton from his pure love of Wake Forest athletics. In this episode, Ben shares his story of his favorite Deacon moment, how he grew his business, and much, much more. So stay tuned and don't forget, hit subscribe and share your favorite podcast, Deac2Deac. Go Deacs. That sounds great. So let's get started.
All right.
So where are you originally from?
I grew up in Murfreesboro, North Carolina, and actually kind of on the edge of Murfreesboro, North Carolina. I'm not even sure that where we lived was maybe all the way into the city limits, but up in the northeast corner of North Carolina. My parents, were my dad and his brother had grown up in Alamance County, Haw River, Mebane area. But he and his brother were the first in their family to go to college. And in my mother's family, her father was the first to go to college. He went to college to become a Baptist minister. And actually in probably I guess it was probably late 1940s, early 1950s, he was the chairman of the board at Wake Forest. My grandfather was, because back then the whole board was Baptist ministers, because it was Southern Baptist School. Yep. So, but anyway, So mom went to Wake Forest, dad went to Wake Forest. They got married while mom was in school. And after dad was done with the Korean War conflict, got out of the service, finished on the GI Bill. And he took a job probably when he worked with his dad in the family business for he had a couple of dry cleaning plants in Alamance County. And I think probably 1961, he took a job as the business manager at Chowan College, which at that time was a little junior college down there that was actually kind of a football powerhouse in the JUCO ranks. And so we moved to Murfreesboro when I was 3 years old. And, I tell people I watch like stuff like Andy Griffith reruns on TV. I'm old enough to have watched it when it was on TV the first time. But it was a lot like that. I mean, it was just an idyllic rural setting, and it was a great little town. And we're in a weird time right now. I mean, here we got a black guy and a white guy on here you're interviewing me today. And I grew up in a town with 75% black, and it was like a lot of towns in Eastern North Carolina. But I had lots of black friends. I had lots of white friends. Actually, until I came to Wake Forest, I didn't understand really a lot of the stuff that's in the air today, because it was foreign to my experience. And so, but it was a great place. And, and I loved living there. And I have a farm there now, Kevin, that's, the farm that my dad and stepmother lived on at one point. They rented a house that was on that farm when they first got married. And I love coming back. One of my best lifetime friends is still there. A farm that we own together, and mine. And I think you may know this, but I'm the oldest of six, and my next brother passed away about 17, 18 years ago from leukemia. So he's buried down there. And so we got, we don't have really any family there anymore, but it was a great place to be from and kind of learn, kind of idyllic American values of hard work and telling the truth and treating everybody the same. And, I came to Winston-Salem, and it seemed like, it must have seemed like somebody from Winston-Salem going to New York for the first time. It seemed like biggest place I'd ever been in my life. But I came here, as you know, on a scholarship, and the folks that gave the scholarship, gave a scholarship that was for Baptist kids from Eastern North Carolina. And and I've met a lot of other students who were on that scholarship or similar scholarships at Wake Forest. But for that, I couldn't have gone to Wake. I would, I would, I wasn't a good enough football player. In fact, I could tell you a great story about football camp when I came in 1971 at Wake Forest. The offensive coordinator at Wake Forest, they just won the ACC championship.
Mm-hmm.
Told me after a week of football camp when I thought I was going to be the great, the next like Jim Plunkett or something, great quarterback and everything. He said, "Son, I sure hope you got good grades or have another sport you can play better than football." So what a great encourager you are, Coach James. So I gave up football after that. But I came here because of that. Otherwise, I would have gone, to a different place. Probably would have ended up at Chapel Hill or a state school, and because that would have been all that my family could have afforded to do.
Mm-hmm.
And my whole life kind of changed because of my experience at our alma mater. I mean, it's just, I learned kind of who I was and what I wanted to be, or what I was and what I wanted to become. And I had great mentors here, and I'm sure you have the same kind of story, right? And you think about your coaches, and you think about this professor who just took an interest in you, or these two friends who kind of felt sorry for you because you were, I was so poor. I mean, like they helped me find jobs. They helped me, kind of piece things together. And I just think about all those relationships, all those intersection points that came to be when I was an undergrad and law school at Wake Forest. And then, I ended up staying here and working because I'm in Winston-Salem today. It looks like I'm in California. I spend a lot of time out there. I ended up staying and working at the university, really the last year and a half of law school. And 8 years out of law school, I was a full-time employee in athletics. And, Gene Hooks was the athletic director. And I think he kind of felt sorry for me because he like put me on the training line, and I go see Miss Juanita in the training line and get my meals for free. And he paid me a little stipend so that I could make my tuition payments. And I would go over to the athletic department and just work, and between classes and stuff, and then waited tables at night and studied a little bit. I wasn't the greatest law student, but I had, it was an unbelievable experience for me. And it kind of set up, as I said, it kind of set up my whole life. That's a long-winded answer.
Well, hey, you laid it out in the way that you can. I like that. I want to ask you something. When did you fall in love with Wake Forest? Because I know you mentioned about your parents, but when did you really get that strong connection for Wake Forest?
I grew up a Wake Forest fan, but it was hard for us because we were so far into Eastern North Carolina, and people can't imagine this today, but like Interstate 85 that goes from Durham up to Richmond and down to Charlotte and so forth, that wasn't done. I-40 wasn't done, and so the trip for me, back and forth from Murfreesboro to Wake Forest was a 7.5-hour trip on a Trailways bus because I didn't have a car, and so that's how I would go back and forth until I could afford a car. I think my junior year in college, but I kind of grew up a Wake Forest fan because my parents, my dad especially, was a big fan, still is. I mean, he'll turn 90 years old, 90 years young next month. And his favorite thing to do is come up here and go to a Wake Forest football or basketball game. He'd rather do that than anything. But I will say that, when I looked at schools, I mean, I looked at Richmond and Duke University, North Carolina, Virginia, Wake Forest, and one of the reasons I was looking at schools because there were a couple of those places that said, "Hey, you're probably good enough to, be a preferred walk-on, or maybe get a little scholarship money to come here and be on our baseball team or our soccer team." But I knew, I had good grades, and so I knew I could compete for some academic scholarships, and I also knew that I could get financial aid, and so my list got pretty narrowed down, and there was a point where I thought I might go to Duke. There was a point where I thought I might go to Richmond. Never really thought about North Carolina or Virginia. They're both great schools. I love to beat them in sports, but they're both, both really good schools. I had lots of friends go to both places, especially Carolina. And but I came up here right after I told my parents that I was kind of leaning towards, Richmond or Duke, my dad brought me up here. Jesse Haddock, who was the golf coach,
Mm-hmm.
was classmate of my uncle's and great friend of my dad's, and they all crossed over in college by at least 2 or 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And Coach Haddock got me and got my dad and me tickets to a Wake Forest Maryland game. Carl Tacey was coaching Wake Forest. Lefty Drizel was coaching Maryland. It was in the Greensboro Coliseum. The place was packed to the gills. People were outside selling tickets even then for $100 a piece, if I recall correctly. I mean, it was, two great basketball teams. I mean, this is in the Skip Brown, Larry Harrison, Leroy McDonald, Jerry Schellenberg. It was in that era. And so we had a really good team at that point. And we beat them, and I think it was a double overtime thriller. And I walked out and I looked at my dad, and I mean, I couldn't talk. I was so hoarse from yelling and screaming at the game. And I was like, I can't even believe I ever thought I would go somewhere besides Wake Forest. And I was so. And the next day we had coffee with Coach Haddock, and I remember telling him, he said, "You need to come to Wake, son. You don't need to go anywhere else." And he was right. And I came here, and honestly, when I was at Wake Forest, Jesse kind of treated me like I was one of the golfers. I mean, he kind of kept an eye out for me, and I got barked at a few times for stepping out of line or missing a class or not doing well in a class. And, because that was kind of the covenant he made with my dad. I realized, I think then, that I really was passionate about Wake Forest. By my junior year at Wake Forest, it was a full scale love affair. I mean, I couldn't see anything. I couldn't see anything wrong with the place. I mean, I thought by my junior year, I was like, this is, everybody's nice to each other. People, it's funny because, like, as I told you before, that I've got some lawyers waiting here to see me about a deal we're working on. But I just had meetings with 2 Wake Forest students, and there's another one who was a student trustee this past year, Kyle Adams, who is interning with me right now, sits right outside my office. And so I've kind of had 3 Wake Forest visits today. And we were all talking about, because we talk about all things Wake Forest all the time, but we were just talking about how friendly and how much community there is at Wake Forest. And like, if you just want to be a SIG-EP and just want to hang out with SIG-EPs, you can do that. If you just want to be a football player and just hang out with football players, you can do that. But if you want to do that and you want to do other stuff, Wake Forest is like, in my opinion, the ultimate place, for that experience, because, we're in big time athletics at the highest possible level, but we only have 5,000 undergraduate students. And so there's really nothing that anybody that comes to Wake Forest can't do. And to me, that's very reflective of what my American experience is, which is we live in the freest and greatest country in the history of humankind, right? Like, I travel all over the world because of my work with the Olympics or the Reagan Foundation, the White House Historical Association, even Wake Forest, and some just for fun. Everywhere I go, every person I meet from other countries wants to be an American, right? Like, look, we got challenges. I don't like to use the word problems, but we have challenges in America. I mean, I could recount lots of the ones that are playing out on the front pages of the newspaper right now and on the television every night. But the fact of the matter is, many of our challenges are birthed out of the fact that we are the freest country in history, that we do have so much liberty. I may hate that somebody would burn an American flag or fly a Confederate flag, but I'm glad they can. I'm glad they can. I'm for free speech. I'm for freedom of movement. I'm for people being able to, Walt Disney had this great saying. He said, if you can dream it, you can do it. America is like the birthplace of that notion. And I tell people, Kevin, that, that in my experience, I mean, I really believe even the company that we built at ISP and IMG College and the companies we're building now, I believe this can only happen in America, because this is the country of opportunity. And so I prefer to not focus on the 1 or 2% of things in life that are maybe not good. Somebody else might define them as 10%, but there is literally no person who should be able to wake up in this country and say that their life is terrible because they live in America. I mean, they need to go to some socialist country in Western Europe or Central America or Latin America or pretty much anywhere else in the world where they don't have anywhere, even our border country neighbors, their citizens have nowhere near the opportunity we do in America. What I'm figuring out is we're kind of a little bit of a spoiled, entitled, pampered bunch. And so, we need a little more rugged American individualism and a hell of a lot less collectivism. We need people to kind of take matters into their own hands. And we need to be, this is the way I define it for people, being a sports guy. First of all, I'm the anti-socialist. No socialist regime in history has ever lasted more than like 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years, right? It never works. It never works. It's actually modern day slavery. You work for the government and have a subsistence living. And so it's the worst thing in the world, so I'm all for, democracy and openness and liberty and so forth. But I would say to you, if you go to some people like Bernie Sanders want to hold out Denmark and Sweden is like, well, they're not in wars and they don't do this and they give their people this and that and everything else. And they pay the highest income taxes in the world. Nobody invades them because there's nothing anybody wants from them. No offense. And they basically pass out participation trophies to everybody. And unfortunately, this is what's happened all over Western Europe. Western Europe used to be some of the greatest democracies and liberty-loving people in the world. And you have to kind of skip across the English Channel and get over to the United Kingdom and Ireland to find that in live practice today. And so I'm less for participation trophies and celebrating winners and understanding that the really smart people who lose. I'm writing a book right now, and I won't go into the contents of it, but the very first 3 or 4 chapters about some of the biggest failures and losses I ever endured or incurred of my own volition, by the way, and the lessons I learned from them. So we can either lose and learn and get better and stronger, or we can sit around and say, well, everybody should be treated exactly the same, and everybody should make exactly the same, and everybody should get a participation trophy, and winning and losing and counting score doesn't matter anymore. You and I both know that's BS.
It is. Now, I want to ask you, so that's a great segue to this next question about you starting ISP and growing that business. What spurred that? Now, you talked about your family having an entrepreneurial spirit. Is that sort of where it came out of?
Well, I'll tell you. So really, in terms of my family, my grandfather, my dad's father, was kind of an entrepreneur. He had a couple of like dry cleaning and laundry places in Alamance County. He was not a wealthy man or anything like that, but he made a really great life for his family, kind of left the farm, went to town, built these businesses. And I used to kind of watch his experience and the fact that he could kind of do some of the things he wanted to do when he wanted to do them because he had done, pretty well. I mean, nobody under any stretch of the imagination would have described my granddaddy as wealthy. Nobody would have, but he did well enough that he could, kind of do as he pleased and be the master of his own domain, so to speak. My parents were great encouragers of us pursuing whatever our dreams might be. Now, I will tell you this: when I called my parents and told them that I had turned down a job making twice as much practicing law in a law firm an hour away from Winston-Salem to stay as a full-time employee in the athletic department for half the money, they both got convenient amnesia. Yeah, I said, what happened to the thing about doing what makes your heart happy, makes you have joy and happy. But I tell, I would just say that part of it was our first child was on the way. I felt like I had a better idea and way for packaging and selling media rights in college sports. I always knew that I wanted to be my own boss. And there are not many ways you can get there without being an entrepreneur. Maybe not my own boss, but just the boss. I mean, I wanted to be able to, you know, grab big concepts, have big goals, chase those goals, and not be inhibited by people in doing so. I really never did it for money, but I did want to do better for my family than I could do for them doing what I was doing at that moment. And so, somebody asked me the other day, I keynoted the Entrepreneuza event that Dan Cohen puts up in the business school over at Wake Forest. And somebody said, well, what was your first job? I said, well, my first job was, my allowance was $0.25 a week. This is in 1966. My first job was, I was reading one of my comic books, and I spent $0.25 to buy 2 comic books at the 5 and Dime store in downtown Murfreesboro, as if there were an uptown or middle of town. There's like 10 stores. And I bought my comic books, and I was reading in the back about, like, you can make all this money if you sell first aid kits, if you sell Christmas cards, greeting cards, et cetera, door to door. My first job was 8 years old. I went door to door and sold Christmas cards. And I realized, like, every time I went out and took a, $4 order for somebody's personalized Christmas cards, that I was making, maybe 50 or 75 cents. And the next thing you knew, I'd made $100. And $100 for an 8-year-old in 1966 was a lot of money. I was like, well, I need, Christmas doesn't come but once a year. So this is good. Well, what am I going to do? So I did the first aid kits. I did Easter cards and Easter baskets. I mean, I just went door to door. And by the time I was 12 and my next brother, who passed away, was 11, we had our own lawnmower company. We had business cards and everything. And so I would say, and I had lemonade stands, and I did all kinds of stuff. I would say that mom and dad raised all of us to be enterprising. And so if not entrepreneurial, then what I would say is they raised us to be enterprising and to kind of take matters into your own hands. And as I said, to use the words of the great American philosopher Cosmo Kramer from Seinfeld, be the master of your own destiny. And so we're, that's kind of where it all started. And so I looked constantly. I was always prodding around the edges of things to see if there was kind of a better way, a new way that could grow into the way. And that's exactly what we did at ISP. I mean, our model, which I get far too much credit for inventing, because really it was kind of the NFL model, except outsourced. All those guys that own NFL teams, men and women that own NFL teams, most of them, frankly, didn't inherit their billions. They're pretty smart people. And so they knew to put all of their rights, radio, television, publications, digital, signage in the football stadium. They knew to put everything in one package, have one person, one group sell it. Most of them did it in-house because they are already for-profit private enterprises, right? So they didn't outsource. But I looked at that, all the colleges, they couldn't afford to hire people to do all this. They don't have the subject matter expertise. Colleges and universities actually mostly stifle entrepreneurs. They're not really bastions of innovation. They may be bastions of learning, but they're not really bastions of innovation and entrepreneurship because they're, and that's by definition because they're giant bureaucracies like federal and state government. And so, so I thought, there's got to be a better way to do this, and I want Wake Forest to win. And like we can't, we're the smallest fish in this big pond that at that point was the CFA, which became the BCS, which became the Power 5 and the CFP. But we were, we're the smallest school by almost 2 to 1 in the Power 65 schools. So this was a much better way. And we brought all our rights in-house at Wake Forest and operated them. And that was great. But we still couldn't grow them in an explosive way because it having a for-profit motive in a not-for-profit bureaucratic environment is just a cultural mixture that just didn't work at that point. Yeah. And so we couldn't pay people, we couldn't incent them to sell more. you know, if you're asking your team to work, from 7 in the morning until 7 or 8 o'clock at night, but everybody else on the university campus, comes in at 8 or 8:30 and is gone by 5 or 5:30, you're having a hard time defending yourself with your team. And so, and because I couldn't pay them more, couldn't pay them bonuses, commissions, etc. So we created this model, and it took the business by storm. And, I started with one school, and by 7 or 8 years in, I had 18 schools. And then another 10 years from that, we had 70. And we merged into IMG and inherited their 10 schools that they had bought one of my little small competitors. And we grew the business another 25 or 30 schools. And in the meantime, we built out 4 other great platform businesses in trademark licensing, and which they had a company that was in that space, but we continued to build that out. And then a ticketing company that we had at ISP, and a stadium seating company we had at ISP. And we built those all into, enterprises that were, once you combined all those companies together, it was almost $1 billion company. And it was the primary reason and driver for the value in IMG worldwide. People knew that company for being a sports agency, but the reality is we really didn't make money from the agency part of our business. We made all of our money in the college sports business and in European white label TV business, and in the IMG Sports Academy that you know of down in Florida. And so, it was fun to be part of the resurgence of a 50-year-old brand that had really lost its luster during our time at IMG. And all of that to get, kind of taken together was again, much the product of my experience as a Demon Deacon. And and I gravitated towards sports. I always had lots of friends that were student athletes, and and spent lots of time in the athletic department. And people ask me all the time, well, why did you, why were you that way? First and foremost, I care. I just love sports, and I love being a fan, right? But secondly, I found that lots of football players and basketball players and baseball players, et cetera, grew up like I did. And so I found some comfort in being around people who grew up in rural areas, went to small high schools, hadn't grown up in families where 6 generations went to college. Nobody in my family, I didn't even know what a prep school was. I mean, and so, so I think, coming to Wake, I found my way with a lot of, great, people who were, I mean, frankly, one of my best friends at Wake Forest in undergrad was a guy named James McDougal, who's, I think, still the number 1 or number 2 all-time leading rusher, and maybe Barkley called him and passed him, but it's either Chris or James. And he grew up down in Maxton, North Carolina, 1A school. Nobody recruited him except Wake Forest. He comes here, and we were great friends, all through school, and we spent lots and lots of time together because we both grew up in these tiny little places, and we come up here, and even Wake Forest to us seemed big. I mean, that's how the towns we grew up in were so small that Wake Forest seemed like a big city to us.
Now, I'm from Laurinburg, which is right next to Maxton,
Scotland County, right next to Lumberton County.
Exactly. So with all of this time you spent around the different student athletes, different sports, your love for Wake Forest over your entire life, I want to ask you this. What is your favorite Deacon moment? And I know you want to say the 99 Aloha Bowl team, so we'll just take that off the table. I know that's at the top of your list. So let's give people a little surprise here. So what is your favorite Deacon moment?
I'll tell you what, that was great. That was a great win. It's hard to pick just one, but I'm going to hit a couple. I mean, watching what Randolph Childress did in the 95, 96 ACC tournaments. And in the one tournament in particular where he just, he was literally unstoppable. I've told people this. In fact, I tell my state and Carolina friends, the greatest ACC basketball game in history wasn't a Wake Forest game. It was a game between North Carolina State and the University of Maryland, 1974 ACC championship. Winners going to NCAA tournament, and ultimately that was NC State won the national championship, right? There were only 16 teams in the NCAA tournament back then. that's the greatest game I ever saw. And I was there in Greensboro. But the greatest and most heroic performance I've ever seen in ACC basketball was when Randolph kind of put that team, lots of players contributed, but he kind of put them on his back and kind of carried us through that tournament. And when we needed a moment, particularly in the first round when we were losing to a not a very good Duke team that year, and he just kind of put the team on his back and went off. And I've never seen a guy just own 3 days of basketball like he did then. Winning the ACC championship in football. I was here when we beat North Carolina at the end of the game in 1970. I was in Florida when we beat Georgia Tech 9-6 in the ACC championship, went to the Orange Bowl. And those were unbelievable memories. But I'll tell you, I told last year's team, I said, you have a chance. I've told the last 2 teams, Coach Clausen's asked me to come over and talk. I've said, you have a chance to be the first team in the history of Wake Forest football to go to 4 straight bowl games. And then this year to go to a 5th straight bowl game. And when you start getting into 5 and 6 and 7 bowl games in a row, then you're talking about actually having real live winning persona and tradition. And that's where we are in our football program, and frankly, lots of our programs. I'm heartbroken by the men's loss the other night in the soccer tournament because they are good enough to have lost. They're young enough to have lost 2 games before, but they're good enough to win the national championship. They're just so young. And but Bobby Moose, is there a better coach in America in any sport, right? And you look at our men's and women's tennis teams and men's and women's golf teams, and they're all competitive at a national level. But it's just really fun when you see your program kind of make that turn where they are considered a traditional powerhouse in their sport. And I have no doubt that the boy from Lone Tree, Iowa, town of 4,000, as I told him, you lived in a metropolitan area, Coach Forbes, compared to where I did. We had 1,500. But I have every confidence that he's a person who can come in and change the dynamic and fortunes of our basketball program and take us to the next level and the kinds of heights that we enjoyed consistently under Dave Odom and then again with Skip Prosser. We've done it before and we can do it again and we will do it again. And I think he's the guy to get it done.
Now, you talk about the success that the different sports are having. And part of that is facilities like the Sutton Sports Performance Center. If you could talk a little bit about what that means to you and how you got involved in that and creating this game changer for all of our athletic programs.
So it's interesting you say that the young lady who just came in was the chairman of this Entrepreneuria event. She's a senior at Wake Forest. And I gave a shout out to Kyle Adams, my intern, but her name was Marie Anderson. And she was just in here. First thing she did when she walked in, she said, "Thank you for the Sutton Center for the regular student body, and thank you for the Sutton Center for the student athletes." And it really touched me. Literally, I'm a very emotional person. Literally, I could feel kind of my eyes well up a little bit. Because when a student comes in and says that to you, when Boogie Basham comes up and says, gives you a hug and says, this only happened because of guys like you. When, Justin Haran says to you, thank you for proving that Wake Forest cares about football. They go to all these other campuses. They see what everybody else has. Winning at Wake Forest is frankly a little heavier lift than it is to win at the University of Alabama or University of Georgia or State School. It just is. Those are facts, and they're indisputable facts of the universe. And so we have to me, we have to start by saying, philosophically as an institution, are we committed to developing young men and women to reach their fullest potential, period? And if the answer to that is yes, then I want us to have the best theater department, the best English department, the best athletic department we can possibly have. And And so, frankly, on Nathan Hatch's watch, we've gotten lots of good things done around athletics, which for many years was, quite frankly, for a lot of people on that campus, kind of an afterthought. I remember taking 7 or 8 of our primary donors. You'd know them all because you can go on the kind of the wall in the Sutton Sports Performance Center and see their names at the top. But I took them to lots of other schools. I said, let's go get on my plane. We're going to fly. We're going to go to TCU, Texas A&M, University of Texas, Baylor. Took another trip. So we're going to go to Tennessee. We're going to go to Georgia. I'm trying to remember where else. Alabama, we went to.
That's a great trip. Those sound like some great trips.
And then took a smaller group to Michigan and Notre Dame. And at that point, the ACC was, quite frankly, along with the Pac-12, was kind of lagging behind in football. This was 7 or 8 years ago. And so the Big 12, the Big 10, and the SEC were certainly ahead of us in terms of overall conference competitiveness. And they said, well, why aren't we going to ACC schools? Well, I said, well, there's a reason. The ACC right now is either the 4th ranked or 5th ranked league in the power rankings, right? We have 1 or 2 good teams and, frankly, a whole bunch of also rans or average football programs. And so we got to go see what the best do. And so we came back and I said, so ways that you prove that you care about our student athletes are, as an example, A, have the best coaches in America. Go out and recruit and retain great talent. And, I just, give an unabashed shout out to guys like Bobby or Dave Clausen or Jerry Haas or Kim Llewellyn and lots of others in our department. But these are world-class, as good of coaches in their sport as there are anywhere in the country. So that's one. B, you've got to show them other ways. We needed to be able to bring, if a kid wanted to, I can't remember, is it called gray shirting when they come in January of their senior year?
Yeah.
And they can come in, they can get a spring practice. Would we bring kids in for as much as 11 semesters and 5 to 10 summer schools so that they could keep up, get ahead on their studies, develop into great football players, be great students? Would we make that kind of financial commitment and recognize the fact that, particularly in a big numbers game like football, that we have to be a developmental program? We're not in the business. No offense to anybody that goes to Alabama or Georgia or anywhere else that signs 5-star recruits. But the fact of the matter is, and these are true facts, probably not 10 to 20% of the 5-star recruits in America, 20 to 30% of the 4-star recruits in America could be admitted to Wake Forest. So we're a developmental program. We're mostly going to live on 3 stars, some 4 stars. Maybe we'll get lucky with a 5-star one day. We've never had one yet. We got a few 4 stars right now. Donovan Green, he's a man, right?
Yep.
But the reality is that we're a developmental program. And so our path to winning is to have great developmental coaching, bring them along in academics, bring them along in athletics, give them the time to develop their games, because, most of them came from places where they might have, maybe they played for great coaches in high school, but they might not have had great facilities, et cetera. They didn't have a lot of the things that maybe a kid that goes to IMG Academy has as a 5-star recruit. I know, because I was there when we built the thing out. And then the other piece is to understand that to do that, you need a home for all that to happen. And our facilities were dead last in the ACC. And now I'm going to tell you, Kevin, today, I see these people that come up with these rankings, these sports writers, and they say, well, here's the ranking of football facilities in the ACC. And I realize, they're paid by the word, but they're not paid to be intelligent, because they've actually never been on campus and looked at the facilities. Because the reality is, for our football and men's basketball teams, really for almost all of our teams at Wake Forest, we have virtually no peer in the Atlantic Coast Conference or the Southeastern Conference. Literally, if you went to all 14 schools in the SEC and all 15 counting Notre Dame, and hopefully one day they'll be a full member in the ACC, and you said, okay, we're going to go see all the football facilities at all those schools, Wake Forest would be in the top 3 or 4 total of those 29 teams. Total. And so, and we're still missing some pieces. yeah, we don't play in a 105,000 seat stadium, but I've been in BB&T Field, Truist Field, when there were 35,000 people in there, and they're right on top of that football field, and you know that. I mean, a lot of these
Yeah.
stadiums, the stadium's way away. At our place, that we hardly have room for the sideline stuff that needs to take place.
Mm-hmm.
Crowd's right on top of the field. When that place has got 35,000 people and it's rocking and rolling,
Yeah.
and you're not looking up to see if there's an upper deck or not. And so we don't play in a 105,000 seat stadium like Alabama does, but on balance in the rest of the program, in my view, we don't have to take a back seat to anybody. Now, having said that, we can't fall back in the way that I've seen Wake Forest and almost every other school. As you know, I've been in the college sports business for 35 years. You can never rest on your laurels. You can never rest on your laurels. We got to keep working. We have to fight harder. We have to promote our brand. We have a great story to tell. If a state school went to 5 straight bowl games that hadn't had that kind of streak in recent years, they'd be on the front of the Athletic and Sports Business Journal and USA Today.
Yep.
But they still look at us as kind of little old Wake Forest. Everybody, all my friends know to never say that in front of me. Never use little engine could or little old Wake Forest. We just have to work harder. We just have to work harder, and we all have to recognize that. But our upside potential is beyond measure, and we can win championships in all of our sports, in my view. And frankly, I'm pulling for. I'd love to see the CFP. I mean, I think it's great with 4. It's better than when it was when it had 2. I think it'd be really cool if it had 6 or 8 or 12, and you could get 2 teams from a conference in. And I like the direction and trajectory of our program. And some people, if a Carolina fan or a Clemson fan or Florida State fans watching this right now, they might say, well, what is he talking about? I'm telling you that we can make that field in football one day. I really and truly believe that we have the right kind of leader. We've got more stuff in the facilities pipeline, more things in the programmatic pipeline, and kids all over the South now think of Wake Forest as a football destination, as well as a golf and a tennis and a soccer and a baseball and a basketball destination. And so I'm excited about where we are. I've said this for the last 5 years. I believe that we've entered into what will become the golden age of Wake Forest sports. And there's no reason to ever say that it has to end. And if you're going to have just a golden age, remember there's still platinum. So we can have a platinum age after the golden age.
I like well I know you have you kind of short on time. I want to ask you this last question.
Yes, sir.
What is the future of college athletics and entertainment? Just what do you see coming on the horizon when you look at college sports, the business of sport? What are some things that you see coming?
So I think different sports have different things that they need to work on. Basketball's got to figure out the AAU and recruiting cesspool. And so it just does. And people don't like to talk about it publicly, but it doesn't bother me. I think the reason my grandmother lived to be 99 years old and be mostly healthy and have a great life until she was 99 is never have an inside voice to always say what she meant, mean what she said. And so that's what I'm going to say. Basketball's got to fix the recruiting piece. I'm glad we have a person that doesn't stoop down and play in the cesspool, but frankly, lots and lots of schools do. And that's driven by the nature of their recruiting calendar and how much dependence there is on the AAU. Back in the day, if you recruited the mom and the high school coach, you were basically recruiting a three-headed monster. Yeah. You recruited the kid, the mom, and the high school coach. We've taken really some of the most important people out of the equation, and what's happened is now, in basketball in particular, kids kind of get treated almost like a commodity, and that's just not right. And I think it's led to a place where college basketball is not as good of a game as it was 20 years ago. I think it can be, and I actually think it will be, because I think people want to have college basketball be wildly successful. college football's never been more popular. It continues to see growth trajectory. There's massive growth in sponsorship revenue and interest and following. When I was growing up, you could get like 2 games on a Saturday, one on maybe CBS and one on ABC. One was almost always a Notre Dame game against whoever they were playing. One was either Alabama or Georgia and whoever they were playing. Now they got football almost every night of the week, got it all weekend long. You got all these people out there, again, the talking head sports writers who say the bowl season's overrated. More kids are going to opt out. Nobody's going to play. Nobody cares about the bowls. And then you look at all the television ratings for bowl games, and the worst bowl game television rating is better than any in-season, regular season college basketball game. So don't tell me the bowls are meaningless. When I watch our kids collect their 5th straight ring for going to a 5th straight bowl, you can't tell me that bowl experience for them last year in Charlotte, the Duke's Mayonnaise Bowl, was not significant. In fact, most of them are still hurt or mad, angry, literally angry that we lost the game because they knew we were the better team that day. And so I think that football continues to have this massive upside. And I think there's going to continue to be interest in other sports. If you ask the folks at ESPN, they love putting like women's softball on. They love putting men's and women's lacrosse on. The Golf Channel's now doing more college golf tournaments, and it's kind of magical TV because everything the PGA Tour puts out is mostly, which is really fun to watch, is mostly stroke play. But in lots of these tournaments that they put on TV on the Golf Channel are the match play tournaments, and that's great theater. People are really interested in that. So I think college sports as an enterprise, and it is an enterprise, and there's no reason to hide and act like it's not. There's this huge upside, and we got a lot of things to negotiate, to kind of figure out with NIL and all that kind of stuff. But I would encourage every college football student and student athlete, basketball, baseball, remember where you came from, and remember that Wake Forest education is worth more than any little side change or side hustle you might have in college, because that degree is going to hold up in the court of life for the rest of your life. And that's really what matters more than anything else. And that fundamentally is why my family does what they do for Wake Forest. We see the benefits of so many first and second generation college students that come to Wake Forest, have the Wake Forest experience. In athletics, they have the upside of being, they participate on the largest level. They're Power 65. That's as good as it gets in college sports. And yet they come out with this degree that has lifelong benefit and that they'll treasure. And when they're 30 years old, they get it. Sometimes when you're 22, you don't get all that stuff. I didn't. So I don't know why we'd hold them to a different standard. So, but it's great stuff. Love being with you today, brother.
Well, thank you. And appreciate you taking the time out. And when you get the book done, you've got to come back and talk about it.
I will. I'd love to.
And again, thank you.